Hello, we continue our discussion about different personality types from the book, like basically reading books surrounded by idiots. And like I'm reading some parts, giving my comments. Yeah, we're learning, in other words, different types of personalities. So here we go, let's fucking go. Can I help yellows to manage their stress? Let me remind you, yellow type of personalities, it is type of personalities when people, energetic, optimistic, they like to have fun, and they don't like to do regular boring task. Okay, let a yellow organize a party. He urgently needs to meet people in social contexts. He can sink very deep into his own misery if he remains under stress for too long. When things at their worst, suggest a pub crawl, a party, or why not just a simple barbecue. It doesn't need to be fancy, but make sure he gets to enjoy himself for a while. Also make sure that it's fun, because you gotta remember that yellow personalities, for them it's very important to have a fun atmosphere. Stress factors for greens. And green personality is type of personality when people like to be in a comfort zone. They don't like to have a conflicts, and they would rather to compromise and say yes. If you for any reason would like to get a green to feel stress, I propose the following unpleasant things. So in other words, we will discuss about things which is triggering green type of personality. Take every form of security away from him, which makes sense because you gotta remember that green personality expected things, in comparison with the yellow. If yellow avoids regular boring expected things, for the green expected regular shit, it equals safe. Give him tasks that he's never done before without explaining anything whatsoever to him, but at the same time expect a perfect implementation. Leave him alone in meetings with people who place unreasonable demands on him. Do not support him when things heat up in a conversation. Send an angry red type of personality. It is like a boss type of personality who say things directly without sugarcoating. Send an angry red to rant at him. The stress will soon follow. In other words, if you wanna fuck with the green personality to put him under the stress, you gotta put him in the situation when there's no clear guidelines, when there's a pressure, and they gotta show quick thinking. Yeah, this is definitely triggers green, because again, they like to do regular expected things. They don't like to get challenged with the new things. Okay, the next thing which is pissing off green type of personality, leave lots of loose ends. Unfinished tasks and loose ends are deeply disturbing. Greens like to know how things fit together, and when they don't understand how the process works, it won't go well. unfinished project, things that have been started but drawn out without any ending in sight, really mess things up for greens. This is why yellows are phenomenal at causing stress for greens. In other words, again, green need like a clear step-by-step guideline. They don't like to when there's a gap of information. And in comparison with them, yellow personality, they more creative. For them, it's the opposite. They like to handle like a difficult situation. The next thing, hang around him constantly if you want to piss him off, like a green personality. If a green doesn't get his private space, if there's nowhere he can withdraw from the world, he gets very stressed. He likes other people, of course, but he needs to be alone with himself also. If this is not possible, then he can't think anymore, which is very accurate, because you can call it like an introvert, I guess, that some people get energized by being with other people, but green personality, they like to be alone, because when they alone they get energy from themselves. Okay, the next tip, make lightning fast. Not like a tip, it's like a thing that like a triggering green and makes them yellow, cry and pissed off. Okay, make lightning fast changes and unexpected changes of direction. This is the specialty of reds and yellows. Quick decisions that they don't always explain. Greens are miserable when they force it into making unexpected and rapid changes. And they often respond by ending up in a state of absolute indifference. The worst kind of change is when green gets an order in the morning, and just as he begins to reflect on how he will do it, in a counter order comes. In other words, greens don't like quick thinking. They need like more time to process information. Another thing about greens, in terms of like what other things pissing off greens, ask him, would you be so good as to read all the whole thing from the beginning to end? Having to read all a task is synonymous with failure. If something must be redone, it can only be because your work was not good enough for the first time. In other words, negative feedback. By extension, this means that you're not good enough as a person, which of course is extremely stressful. In other words, they like a green personality, hardly handling critics. They don't like critics. Tell a green, look here, we can't agree on absolutely everything. Disagreements in a work group or in the family inevitably lead to stress. Only troublemakers enjoy conflict. Friction in the most important group, the family, is particularly serious. A green would know what he should do. In other words, again, green personality don't like conflicts, and that's another thing would like make them stressed. Push him into the spotlight. under no circumstances will green want to take center stage when they are in a like larger groups. Groups of more than 3 people would be considered large groups unless the green knew everyone very well. In other words, they like a green personality want to deal in a situation when like things expected, and this also related to the people. In other words, before going somewhere, they get to know what kind of people there. They don't want to deal with like strangers. Groups of more than 3 people would be considered large groups unless the green knew everyone very well. If you force a green into such a situation, he will just stare at his feet. Everyone can see how uneasy he is, and the rest of the group will also be stressed, not good. So definitely, as we see constantly, this kind of sign of like that green personality, very like introvert. They don't like to be social, not completely, but to be social with like unfamiliar people. Okay, the next thing about what does a green do when he gets stressed and feels pressure. In other words, we will talk about the coping mechanism for green. He becomes very reserved and almost cold. His body language becomes rigid and closed. And if you're the one who triggered his stress, he won't have anything to do with you. Some greens can exhibit strong apathy. They become cold and sympathetic even towards people whom, in normal circumstances, they care very much about. So, in other words, they become like a closed body language, less talkative. They also become very hesitant and uncertain. Stress makes greens insecure and afraid of making mistakes. It can be at work, but also at home. If a child gets sick, a green becomes passive and just looks on, because he's afraid of doing the wrong thing. He's also internalized the blame for the situation, and they become completely closed. So, as we see author mentioning that this kind of which is kind of looks like a nothing special, like I don't know, your family member gets sick, even this kind of like a looks like, you know, normal shit. For them it is unexpected, and they kind of overthinking it and become again passive. In other words, they definitely not proactive and kind of overthinking, and instead of like taking logical, next steps, they starting to find excuses and blame someone else instead of like doing some actions to solve it. So in other words, as we can see, green personality not great problem solvers, because they that kind of personality who just like wanna follow the thing which you're talking to them and nothing more. At work, it may be slightly different. It depends. Many greens end up in a road of obstinacy or stubbornness, provoking those around them by refusing to change anything. Even when they see that a particular method is not working well, they can refuse to act. It seems strange, but the typical green stubbornness gets the upper hand and prevents them from doing anything. So in other words, they are overthinking, preventing them to do any action. because I guess their core main emotion is fear. Okay, the next thing, can I help greens to manage their stress? Allow them to do nothing. Give them free time for things like gardening, sleep, or other form of relaxation. So it's, in other words, lazy motherfuckers, like typical, I guess, security people who just like to sit. Maybe something like sending them off to a movie, not with a large group of people, but possibly on their own, or giving them a good book that takes 2 days to read. They don't really want to do anything. Let them do nothing. Let them do nothing until the stress subsides. Then they will be back to their normal selves. In other words, green personality, a kind of personality who waits until the shit hits the fan, or how they fucking say in English, until the it's gonna be like a short deadline. It is like people who doing things when it's already close to the deadline. They definitely, like green personality, don't do stuff early, and in other words, they get soft, lazy, and that's all because they don't like unpredictable things. Yeah, like your typical grandma, Alright, stress factors for blues. Blue personality, this type of personality, which they also like, in terms of like common things with the green, they also kind of like introvert, but blue personality, not because they shy or something. For them, for the blues, it's like a nothing personal, just business. They, like blue personality, I guess, don't mind to have a conflict, and they say things directly. They got analytical brain, and again, in terms of like in comparison with the green and yellow, especially with the yellow, blues less emotional and more logical. Okay, let's discuss about stress factors for blues. If you, for any reason, would you like to get a blue to feel stress, just upset everyone of his calculations. Tell him you don't know what you're talking about. You may think that blues don't take criticism personally, but if they believe that the criticism is untrue and unfounded, it can be very hard on them. Not because they're afraid of conflict or that your relationship will suffer, but because their sense of perfection is being besmirched. In other words, they like to argue, and I guess they wanna convince you to get their point of view. Have the management team make a spontaneous decision. It's another thing that pissing off blues. A blue is often okay with change because he doesn't ever consider anything completely perfect, but he needs to know the motivations behind the change. If it's not in the plan, then it's unplanned, and a lack of planning indicates poor structure, not good. Inevitably, this leads to headaches. In other words, again, in terms of like a comparison with the green, blue personality don't mind changes, but blue personality needs to know reason why. Another thing about pissing off blue personality, tell him this could be risky or uncertain, but we are going to go ahead anyway. I guess it's related to the thing that in comparison with yellow, that like yellow can, I guess, accept any statement, phrase, which just like giving you emotional promises without like some specific numbers or details. Like yellow personality can accept it, but blue personality, they don't believe this shit. They need numbers, they need details. You can't say to the blue, it's like I don't know, let's say project not going well, but you say it's going to be everything okay. They're not going to accept it. They need like a proof, details. Because they're more logical, not emotional. There's a certain amount of risk in everything. A blue sees risks everywhere. If a red were to say that jumping from a plane without a parachute is huge risk, a blue would say that it's risky to buy a new lawn mower. You never really know what can happen, and the faster things go, the greater the risks become. Another thing which pissing off blues, surprise him with something like your in-laws coming or unannounced. Fantastic. It's a matter of order and like a structure of walking at a relaxed pace, or renovating the kitchen according to like a clearly established plan. If half the family were to drop in all of a sudden, it would upset everything. You should never try to surprise a blue. Since he may not have communicated his own plans completely, you can create quite a problem. In other words, they also don't like unexpected things, but in comparison again with the green, blues, it's not because I guess they don't like unexpected things, but because they like to have control, like more control, and follow their guideline. I guess that's the thing in terms of like a difference, how blues and greens approaching unexpected things. So the next thing in terms of like pissing off blues, say whoopsie daisy, what happened here? Mistakes made by blockheads and careless people. Blues don't make mistakes. So when everyone else makes a mess of things and disrupt his plans, a blue might simply close the door and refuse to listen. He doesn't want to hear that the project has crashed. He just wants to keep doing his part, even if that task no longer makes any sense. So, in other words, seems like blues got bias, how they fucking call it, that sunker cost bias. I guess it's called when like individual, like any person start to do some shit, and even though it doesn't make sense further, which is actually surprising because blues gotta be more logical, but all of us has biases. So in other words, blues, I guess, more likely to continue to do some shit even though it's not makes sense, just because I guess in their mind they think like they already spent time and energy, and that's why they keep going. Alright. The next thing about blues which makes like a pissing off, tell him forget about the bureaucracy, let's innovate. Don't you have any imagination? We have to be a bit more flexible here. This is a great way to get a blue to lose his footing at work. People who break the rules and go against the regulations to be regarded with suspicion, and you need to keep them on a short leash. If a blue realizes that he is in the hands of an organization that pays no attention whatsoever to proper procedures, he can show considerable resistance. In other words, blues is about kind of like a bureaucracy, following strictly some guideline, no any so-called different creative thinking. Yeah. Another thing in terms of what is like a pissing off blues, remind him we simply need to take bigger risks. Variation on the preceding point. Right is right, and proper preparation is the be all and end all, the alpha and omega. It even says so in a book. So when a blue can't prepare himself in his sometimes extremely cumbersome way, it triggers stress. He's the opposite of spontaneous, and you simply can't force a blue to respond to a situation before he's had time to acquaint himself with the subject. In other words, because blues need time to process information by themselves, I guess they kind of don't has a trust issues, and they're not gonna show you like a quick thinking, and not because they're stupid, but because they need to process information by themselves. He will have so many reservations, he won't be any use. Alright, the next thing about what kind of things stressing blues. Surround him with overly emotional people. No, sloppy and sentimentally is downright unpleasant. It is messy and awkward, and a blue doesn't like it. Logic is what counts, and if you overlook this, you will find it very trying. He will make himself scarce, and he will never forget that you are an overly emotional person who doesn't use your brain in the same way he uses his. In other words, definitely yellow personality not gonna be a friend with a blue, because they completely opposites, like blue more logical and yellow more emotional. Alright, and the next section, what does a blue do when he gets stressed and feels pressure? He becomes excessively pessimistic. Oh yeah, it actually gets worse than usual. Suddenly everything becomes pitch black and he falls into a pit of despair. Lethargy is common and nothing is of interest anymore. Gloom and doom will rain down on all of us. He also gets unbearably pedantic. When they feel stress, many people increase their pace in order to compensate. Not a blue. He stomps on the brakes. Now is not the time for making any mistakes. Those around him can expect constant criticism. He will suddenly point out every little mistake he observes, and they are quite few. He might also become an unbearable know-it-all. So, in comparison with a yellow, like for example, yellow's coping mechanism, like the way how yellow optimistic personality dealing with the stress, they doubling down to their optimism. They even putting a higher goals. But for the blues, it is completely opposite. Blue personality, they become more pessimistic. They doubling down to the details, which I guess make things even worse, because not every detail important. But yeah, I hope it was interesting. Let me know in comments your point of view, what kind of new topics you want to listen to, and see you next time.